It was Christmas Eve of 2017. I'd lost $25,000 the night before, sitting in a club by myself, probably till about 4 or 5 in the morning. I drained my mum's super of about $70,000 over that last year or two.
Hello and welcome to Wellbeing. I'm Jack Hodgins. Today I'll be discussing the experiences of having problem gambling. We are joined by Paul, who has had first-hand experience with gambling problems, most notably with sports betting. Through the Gambling Impact Society, Paul is a regular presenter for their Consumer Voices community education sessions. These sessions are aimed at educating people on the effects of gambling. He is here today to share his perspective and to share a little bit from his story. Hello, Paul, and welcome to the program.
Hi, Jack. Nice to be here.
Before we begin, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself, Paul?
So I'm 47 years of age. I currently work for a not-for-profit community organisation. I do project work. I also do some youth work with that organisation. My career background was primarily media and sports administration. I probably started my gambling journey at about 20 years of age. It didn't become probably a serious issue for me until I reached my 30s, but it certainly had a massive impact on my life and kind of dictated where I am now, I guess.
What first drew you to gambling?
I went to TAFE when I was about 20 years of age. I was studying at TAFE and I met a group of guys, and we actually became, there was probably 5 to 10 of us, we became really good friends, and we're still all good friends to this day, actually. But a couple of those friends that I made at that stage were gamblers. They gambled, I think, because their parents did, their fathers did, and even at that early age, they were really into it. So that's kind of how I started with it. It kind of, throughout those years, it was just kind of the norm for my mates. I guess it's such a socially accepted thing in Australia, and it's part of our identity and our culture, really, which I think is part of the problem, that you just, go to the pub or the club on a Saturday and have a few beers and have a bet. So it was kind of a really easy thing to slip into.
What were your methods of gambling? Yeah,
so initially I would bet just through the TAB, normally not at the TAB itself, normally at a pub or at a club. That's kind of how it started for me. Then in 2012, when I reached my 30s, I opened an online... I should say, I got really serious about horse racing for a while there before the advent of online gambling. Probably for a couple of years, I would actually go to the track every Saturday. So I'd travel to Sydney. I'd either be at Rosehill or Randwick every second Saturday, and then the alternate weeks I'd be at Kembla Grange. And myself and a friend of mine, we would bet in the betting ring with the bookies, because we knew we could get better odds and better prices than what we could betting through the TAB. So yeah, through the TAB at pubs and clubs, and then on track with bookies from, as I say, from my early 30s. Switched to online. Online is what really spiraled and got me into a fair bit of trouble.
What do you think made it so addictive for you?
It's a good question. I think it's different from person to person. What we tend to see and what the research indicates is the more kind of personal issues you have, whether they be mental health issues, depression, family problems, work issues, relationship issues, a little bit like drugs and alcohol, it tends to be a form of escape for people, and it certainly was with me. It started to become a problem for me when I was betting online and losing more than what I should, because you're not betting with real money. It's just numbers on a screen.
Yep.
At that stage, I had a $22,000 credit limit on my credit cards, and I could literally dump all of that into a betting account and spend it all. Nowadays, the restrictions are tighter with banks. They've had pressure applied to them, so they don't let you do that. But I mean, it wasn't that long ago. You could do it that long ago. And once you then start losing money you don't have and losing more than you should lose because you're betting on credit, you then become more desperate to make that up and you start chasing. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is I was actually quite good when I wasn't drinking and when I was betting properly and doing the form, and you kind of build up an air of invincibility and you deposit money into your account, but you don't withdraw because, the next day you're going to have another bet, or next week you're going to have a bet. You've already doubled your money, so why take it out? You're just going to keep winning and winning and winning. So you become confident, you think you win. And then there's also times where you lose, but then you manage to get out. You have a final bet that gets you out of trouble and you do something miraculous And when that happens, unfortunately, you believe you can always do that. And so you just keep going and going and going, and you push it to the absolute limit. So I think there's a combination of factors. You feel really good when you're betting and you're winning. It's the chemical reaction in your brain is the chemicals it releases similar to that of drugs, cocaine, and so forth. So what it does to you, the way you feel, and also I think the more unhappy you are as a person and the more issues you have in your life, the more you're going to gravitate towards trying to find fulfillment elsewhere and chase those kind of cheap thrills. And that was certainly the case for me.
Would you say, you mentioned that it wasn't until your 30s when you thought it kind of got a bit out of hand. In your 20s, would you say that the gambling habit was healthy at that point? Like, was it manageable?
It was for, I guess, probably the first few years. I would really only bet on big race days. When my mates were betting, I wasn't placing big bets. It was all, if I lost money, it was money I could afford to lose. I kind of set myself boundaries and limits. Then once I started to get more into it and, go on track, there were times that I did kind of, go back to the ATM and lose, fair amounts. And what for me at that time was a fair amount of money. There was times where I'd come home kind of depressed and think, what have I done? And beat myself up and have they talk about the gambling hangover, but kind of had that gambling hangover where you think about it for the next couple of days. So there were moments, but it certainly was nothing like it was always boundaries before online gambling. There was always an end point because you just didn't have that 24-hour access at your fingertips, and you needed money. You know what I mean? You needed the cash. Yep. So while there were moments where I say yes, it did negatively impact me, I couldn't get into any major strife really until the online gambling thing started up.
Would you say that you were actively aware of kind of what was happening, like as the gambling addiction kind of got worse, or were you in denial, or what was your story?
Yeah, I think a bit of both. I think there were certainly moments where I'd had really big losses with massive consequences that in the light of day, with a clear mind, I could say to myself, this is a problem, this is an issue, can't keep doing this. There was a few moments like that, but it was never enough. I never really took accountability. I never really truthfully admitted I had a problem because I always thought I could get out of it, right till I literally hit rock bottom and had nowhere else to go, no one to borrow money from. That's when I sought help and actually said, I have a problem. I've got to make some changes here. I need help. But prior to that, those instances were few and far between, and I never really believed it with any conviction, to be honest with you. I always thought, I can still bet. I've just got to be careful and I've just got to, temper what I do kind of thing. So, no, I didn't really truthfully take accountability and recognise I had the problem I had until it was kind of too late.
Do you recall that moment, the first moment when you said to yourself, right, I need to go get some help?
It was Christmas Eve of 2017 and I'd lost $25,000 the night before, or that same morning, sitting in a club by myself probably till about 4 or 5 in the morning. Cumulatively, I drained my mum's super of about $70,000 over the last year or two. And I woke up and I couldn't go back to my mum to borrow any more money. I had no credit. I had no money in my account. My wife had no idea. As a family, we celebrate Christmas on Christmas Eve, and I should have been waking up joyous. I had a little boy, excited about the day ahead and celebrating Christmas with my family, but I woke up pretty much suicidal on my phone, lying in bed on my phone for an hour trying to apply for those short-term, high-interest loans because I just didn't know what else to do. That kind of was the moment where I was like, I'm done. Like, I have nowhere else to go. I have to face this. I have to take accountability. Yeah.
How did it affect the problem gambling? How did it affect the relationships with friends, families, and work colleagues?
Me working for sporting organisations certainly didn't help because you're around sports all day. Sports is just intrinsically linked to betting. And, people within the sporting industry, even the players, it's just part of the culture. So I actually tried to stop there for a while when I was in media, but then I went back into worked for a sporting organisation, and they just sucked me back in. The people I was working with, my boss, they called me the whiz because, I on a Friday, I used to give tips and I used to provide dog tips. So it kind of built me up to a point where I had to get back into it. I'd stopped betting online. I didn't have to, but it just encouraged me essentially to get back into it. And that's where I started on the slippery slope again, kind of thing. So there was that. Friends, quite a few of my friends have problems and have issues and haven't really done anything about it. So there was times there you certainly relate and you have conversations with your friends about what's happened. When I did come forward and actually get help, I had a certain amount of friends that kind of supported me, even though they have their own issues. Family, horrible. Like I said, I've drained my retired mum's money of, $70,000. I paying that back to this day. I ruined the relationship, for a time there between her and my wife because I was borrowing the money from my mum, and my wife didn't. My mum kept telling me, "You got to tell your wife. You got to tell your wife," and I didn't. And so that fractured their relationship. Yeah. My wife and I separated. We separated in January this year, and we've been living in the same house, but we're about to sell our house. We just told our little boy. So it's, ended my family and my marriage. We had our issues, but I know for a fact without the stress and the pressure and the negative impact of my gambling, I'm sure we could have pulled through everything. So it's ruined my marriage. It's broken up my family. It's caused a lot of harm to those people around me that I love the most. It's put stress, worry, burden on people that do love me, on my family. It's been horrible.
You're listening to Wellbeing, where we're discussing the experiences of living with problem gambling. My guest today is Paul, who has experienced gambling problems, most notably with sports betting. Do you have any strategies to kind of distance yourself from gambling? Because it's so prevalent in Australian culture, I could imagine that it would be sometimes difficult.
Yeah, it's massively difficult, yeah. I mean, as I say, I was really into it. I'd spend, 2 nights a week watching, Sky Racing and watching all the programs. And if I couldn't see them, I'd tape in and I'd listen to all the analysts and I'd read the form. And that's, aside from actually going and betting, going to the track. And, it took a lot of my time. I was truly passionate about it. So, but what I had to do was strip all that. I had to, I got off Twitter, or I had to, I don't follow any racing publications or, on social media anymore. I don't have any of that. I actually got blocking software for a period of time. So I paid to get a blocking program on my phone so that I couldn't download any betting apps. I couldn't get on the websites. So I did that. I just stopped watching the programs. I stopped immersing myself in that culture. So, it's very rare. I mean, I still do it because I want to see my friends. So sometimes I will go to the pub or the club, to catch up with them and have a few beers. But it's not like it was. And, I would say out of all the times they're there and they're in that situation and they want me to come out, I'd say it's probably, 1 in 5 that I actually do go out and put myself in that situation. And when I do, I will also put measures in place. So if I'm going into a pub or a club, to catch up with my friends, I know I'm going to be drinking, then I won't take my debit card. I won't take my credit card. So I know there's, I'll just have a certain amount of cash in my wallet. I can't get any more out from the ATM. So if I've got $300, $400, that's it. That's all I've got. You know what I mean? Yep. If I do have a bet, I know that's it. That's all I can lose, and that's it. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of thinking about their strategies, and I think, and then again, different things work for different people. But for me, I kind of just had to disassociate with it as much as I possibly could.
What were some of the biggest challenges for you in recovery?
I think self-awareness is a massive thing. I think learning and understanding what your triggers are is one thing. So just having a bit of an indication about, hey, this in the past, this would happen, and that's generally what set me on that path. I realised only through looking back on it in rehab that I would blame shift. I would say, I would say to my wife at the time, she'd say, how could you do that? I said, well, I did it because you said this and you called me this, or we had a fight, and I would essentially blame her for my actions and my behaviour. But I learned in rehab, I learned about cognitive behavioural therapy, and I understood that we make our own decisions. We're responsible for our actions. So, I learned to differentiate things outside of your control, circumstances, what people say, what others do, things that happen in life that we have no control over, and how to manage my thoughts and my emotions around those circumstances, and then in turn manage my actions and my behaviours. I learned that I do have a choice, and not to be weak and just to fall into that old lazy trap, and to actually say, well, you know what, yeah, that did happen, but I could actually have some clarity around it and think forward and think, if I just go out and drink now, I'll probably gamble, and what's that going to be like tomorrow? Is it going to make things worse or better, or is it going to make it worse? Where am I going to be in a week? What's happened in the past when I've done that? So what's a better way to deal with it? Just go home, sit on the lounge, watch a movie, go to sleep, whatever it may be. So yes, to reprogram your brain, which is essentially what you have to do.
Yep.
It takes a little bit of time. What else? I guess it is difficult when you're in a situation where you're surrounded with your mates and you're in that environment. Particularly, drinking's probably been the biggest one. There was a period where I didn't, maybe for 6 months, I didn't have any more than kind of 4 drinks. For me, the correlation between drinking and gambling, and drinking and poor decisions, is a big one. So all the times where I've made, lost a lot of money and done horrible things and made horrible decisions, I've been drunk. So probably that, to this day, is probably my biggest challenge, just to learn to be able to go out and have fun without drinking or drinking to excess.
Where do you see yourself going from here?
Right now, I'm in a pretty good space. I went into, as I say, in 2017, I fessed up to my wife, and I started seeing a counsellor. So for about 6 months there, I went to counselling, which certainly helped. Got some financial assistance and financial counselling as well, just to be able to manage and get through. It still put a lot, my wife stuck by me at that time, but it put a lot of stress on our marriage and our relationship. So we would fight often. And when we did, I still didn't have the skills and the strategies to be able to cope with that effectively. So what I would do is I'd default to my escape mechanism. It was fight or flight. My natural flight was to escape into drinking and gambling, so I would lap. That would make things worse. That happened, 2 or 3 times. And I ran into a mate of mine. I tried to borrow money one night. He pulled me outside. He didn't lend me the money. He said, mate, I've just been through a rehab program. You need to do this. It's a 3-week inpatient program. He actually got on his phone that night and made an appointment with my GP online for the Monday so I could get a referral. Within a couple of weeks, I was in the rehab program. I did that, and it kind of changed my life. It just gave me the ability to get outside of this massive hole that I was in, and it gave me some clarity. All I had to worry about was, I had professionals around me. All I had to worry about was focusing on myself, learning, being honest with myself, learning strategies. I could look back retrospectively at how unhappy I was and why, and think about why was I doing this. And I learned that, I learned how to value the things in life that we should be valuing, which are, personal relationships. And that's what really gives you fulfillment. So right now, I'm 2-3 years out of rehab. I maybe have lapsed 3 or 4 times in that time. There's a massive difference now, and a lapse doesn't have to become a relapse. So whereas I would wake up after a lapse and think, this is the end of the world, I can't believe I've done this, beat myself up and think, I've got to get out of this. So I'd continue betting to try and win back what I'd lost, and you just really dig yourself right back into the hole. Now I wake up and I go, okay, well, that was shit. Certainly not what I wanted to do, but compare myself now to where I was 3 or 4 years ago, betting every single day and completely miserable and suicidal. I've come a long way. Yeah, it was a lapse. Let's have a look at some of the circumstances and situations that might have led to it. Who was I with? Where was I? Had I been drinking? And so now the trick is to try and take learning from a lapse and, improve, learn more, and make sure you don't make the same mistakes. What I learned, what I have learned is that recovery is not a straight line. You're going to have your dips, but it's about what you take from those, what you learn from them, and how you handle them. And it's about being kind to yourself, about those, and just trying to press on and move forward and be positive.
How should a society view gambling then? Like, how should we approach it?
Look, I'm not, everyone's going to have their own take. I'm certainly not anti-gambling. I think that the majority of people can have a bet and enjoy it and have fun. People say, when does it become a problem? Well, it's different for everyone, but essentially it's when it starts to have a negative impact on yourself, being the person gambling, or on others around you. That's when I believe it becomes a problem. So if you're starting to feel bad, or depressed, if your mood changes as a result of your gambling, if it's affecting those around you, certainly if you're, not sleeping, certainly if you start lying, if you start to feel start to feel guilt, shame, if you start deceiving people, if you start chasing your bets, all that kind of thing. But I think the emphasis has to be on education and awareness and early intervention, and that's what we lack now. What you're doing now is perfect, and what we're doing at the Gambling Impact Society, that's why we do what we do, because I feel like gambling is 10, 15 years behind drinking, smoking, drugs, domestic violence. All of those issues have been on the radar for a long time, and we don't view them now the same way we did back then, because we're much more educated. The stigma is, slowly being removed. People are having honest, open, frank conversations about it. That's what we need to do now, because people really need to realise that, it's okay to gamble, but here are the pitfalls and here are the traps, and here's how you get into trouble. Here's how to identify it, and there's heaps of ways you can get help. It's free. It's simple. Here's how to get help. Don't wait until you're hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Don't wait until your marriage is destroyed. Don't wait until you've lost your house. Don't wait until you're stealing, you're embezzling. I know people in jail. Don't let it get to that point and think that there's nowhere to turn, because there is. There are organisations out there that will help you. So the minute you feel it's having a slight impact, speak to someone about it. Get help. That is why I do what I do, because I wish I'd gotten help and taken accountability sooner.
You're listening to Wellbeing, where we're discussing the experiences of living with problem gambling. My guest today is Paul, who has experienced gambling problems, most notably with sports betting. How often, when you weren't gambling, were you thinking of gambling?
Yeah, I guess at the beginning, it was more frequent. It was more prevalent. Nowadays, I don't think of gambling at all. I really don't. If I'm at a pub or a club and I'm having a few drinks, I can think about gambling. I might even have a bet. Throughout the course of the day, even if I can watch, sometimes I'm flicking around the TV and the Spring Carnival's on, so I watch racing for an hour. It might cross my mind, but I don't have a bet. Do you know what I mean? I don't. I'm at the point now where I don't really think of gambling at all. I think about it only in the context of the work I do as a lived experience speaker. But other than that, I'm really not tempted. That has taken 3 or 4 years to be at the point that I'm at now. That doesn't mean that I won't ever lapse again, because I could. And it doesn't mean I can get lax. It doesn't mean I can get overconfident, because I've been there before. It doesn't mean I can magically say to myself one night, geez, I've been good. I've got a bit of money saved now, I'll have a little bit of a bet. Well, no, it's probably not a good idea, because I know how that can go. So, it's something that I believe it's something you need to manage every day. You know what I mean? Some people will have to manage it for the rest of their lives. Other people may not. Everyone's slightly different. But it's certainly not something that you go to a counsellor, for a period of time and you're not necessarily cured and it's problem over, solved kind of thing. I think it's something that you have to continue to manage, as you said, especially in today's current times with the amount of advertising and the messages that we're getting bombarded with.
How do you go about that? Because I know I go on YouTube and every second ad will be sports betting.
Imagine when you've got a kid. I've got an 8-year-old son playing game on YouTube, and they're the messages he's getting. You know what I mean? At that age, it's ridiculous.
It is. Have you tried to, in some ways, educate? Was it your son? You said.
Yeah.
Have you tried to talk to him and go, look, this kind of culture, be mindful?
Yeah, I do. I try and educate him through the games he plays. There was actually an instance the other day where he had a certain amount of characters. He was playing a game. The game is called Pet Cemetery. He had these pets that were worth a lot of money. He had the option to, in the game, it's called fusing. So basically to give up what he had and to get something new. But it's a mystery. You don't know what you're going to get. So therefore, you don't know what you're gambling your current assets with, whether the reward is going to be greater or less than what you currently have. And I warned him against doing it. I said, no, you like those pets. He did it. And he got something that was nowhere near as good as what he has. And he was really upset. And I said, mate, you're gambling. Do you know what I mean? You made a decision to risk what you have. And sometimes that can lead to great rewards, which is why people do it a lot. But most of the times, it doesn't. Most of the times, you'll lose and you should have stuck with what you've already got. So I do in my own ways, yes, and in ways that I think he can relate to.
How do you think that the people around you could have helped?
Yeah, I mean it's very difficult, and that's why at the GIS as well. We're big on family members getting support. Going to see counsellors, wives, husbands, partners, kids, parents, because it's not easy to deal with this situation, especially if it's one you have no control over. In particular, when that person has lied to you, deceived you, stolen from you. And I think it's very normal for people to be angry, But what we know is that it's a problem, and the problem is the problem, and it's not the individual. So because someone, has an issue with gambling, is a gambling addict, is a drug addict, is an alcoholic, doesn't make them a bad person. It doesn't mean that they're actually trying with intent to hurt you, to steal you. It just means they've got a hell of a problem. What they actually need is someone to sit with them and to support them. So it's really important for those, as hard as it may be, to go and see someone and to actually understand what it is they're dealing with. By doing that, hopefully they put themselves in a situation where they can be less judgmental and more supportive, and kind of try and sit with people and be by their side and try and tackle the problem with them and encourage them to kind of to get help and support them. Now, I know that that's easier said than done, but that's really the approach that is most successful and will most likely help people who are having issues or problems.
What would be the take-home from this interview you'd want people to remember the most?
Speak up and seek help. Speak to someone if you feel it's negative impacting you, impacting anyone around you, or if you have a friend, family member who you feel has an issue and it's impacting them, but they're not kind of owning up to it. Explore that. It's as simple as going onto the Gamble Aware website, and they list a ton of resources and a ton of numbers you can call 24 hours, chats you can get on your laptop, on your phone. There's counsellors out there. It costs you nothing. In most cases, you can be in front of a counsellor the next day. The help is really accessible. It's really available. It's really simple.
Well, it was a pleasure talking with you, Paul. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, no problems at all. Thanks, Jack. I really appreciate the opportunity.
My guest today was Paul, collaborator with the Gambling Impact Society and someone with first-hand experience of problem gambling. Thank you for listening. I'm Jack Hodgins, and all of us at Wellbeing wish you well.